Everything has its time and place, and I am a fan of barefoot activities and barefoot shoes. I personally want people to wear whatever shoes they want, whenever they want. But initially, some people aren't ready for that. Now, I know doing things in barefoot shoes versus no shoes at all is not exactly the same thing, but a lot of the times the principles are the same for why I don't think a lot of people need this immediately. The benefits of barefoot shoes is that they're going to help your foot create a more genuine relationship with the ground. So our foot was designed to have interactions with the ground to help us move through the gait cycle and the world. And there are a ton of receptors on the bottom of our foot that help us create awareness of our environment and allow our hips to access certain positions, which feed up and down the chain from the foot up to the hip and the hip down to the foot. Now, this is way better than someone who has a really cushiony shoe that's not right for them, and they're basically just in a sensory deprivation chamber for their feet because they're not able to create that relationship with the ground, and their foot is going to be lost in space, so to speak. So some people benefit from going barefoot immediately, and these are a lot of the success stories that you hear of I went barefoot and now my foot feels great, my knee pain's gone, my hip pain's gone, my back pain's gone. There are a lot of stories like that. But what you don't often hear is the people who tried it and they actually feel worse or they saw no benefit. And this is because a lot of people, when they go into this barefoot thing, are looking for an instantaneous fix. So they go from 0 to 100 real quick. They go from being in these cushiony shoes their whole lives into this barefoot environment, and their foot's not ready for that because the foot is going to be lacking some mechanic that it needs in order to interact with the ground effectively and the rest of your kinetic chain. And I think that there's a progressive way where we can marry both worlds together. Let's talk about different types of feet and how they could be influenced by this. But first, we need to understand how the foot moves. So real quick, let's do a gait cycle recap to understand the mechanics of the foot. As we move into early stance, we strike the ground, hopefully more so on the outside border of our heel. Yes, we need to heel strike. I have a video that I'll link up above if you don't believe me, lots of sources cited. And then we move into a mid-stance position of our foot, where the foot is going to flatten out, the arch is going to drop, and we're going to move into an internally rotated position of our tibia. And that is necessary for us to stretch out the bottom side of our foot and reflexively spring that back up so we can push forward and re-supinate or re-raise that foot arch. This is called the windlass mechanism. Now, if someone has a higher arch, this is someone that has an externally rotated position of their foot. The tibia is also often, very often, going to present externally rotated as well. And they're going to have a hard time finding the inside edge of that foot arch, which is necessary for us to transition from early to mid stance. So as I load body weight onto one side and I pick the other foot up, as I go into mid stance on my stance leg side, that arch needs to flatten out because I need to be able to deal with the ground reaction forces. I'm loading body weight into the ground is pushing up on me, so I need to push back down into the ground. This is basic physics, and internal rotation helps us do that. So if I can't do that, I'm going to stay on the outside edge of my foot, relatively speaking. I'm not going to be able to properly load my body weight onto that side. Now something else has to take the beating. Something else has to take that loading, and that could be your knee, it could be your hip, it could be your low back. And this is a very important thing to keep in mind. The other thing is that you could just collapse your whole foot in. So if you can't properly pronate, you can just fully dump that foot in. And again, that can stress the knee and the hip as well. So why would you take someone with a fairly relatively high arch and just have them go barefoot right away if they can't get their foot to pronate? What I'm going to be looking for in these people is, can their foot even pronate in the first place? If it can't, then I'm not going to put them in an environment where it can't actually do that effectively every step they take. What might be helpful is giving them some arch support to give their arch a reference to push down into something as they load their body weight onto that side. That's a big reason why arch support is very helpful. Another positive quality of a good shoe is that it has a lot of heel support in the back. So if you were to push on the back of it, it wouldn't collapse in. That is ideal because that's going to provide stability for our heel to then strike the ground effectively and guide us into a better mid-stance position. So that is why I look for that quality in many shoes that I recommend. I use objective tests to determine that a good pair of shoes is exactly what someone needs. So I'm going to test them. I'm going to have them walk barefoot, and then I'm going to have them walk in their normal shoes. And I'm going to see where their range of motion is before and after they walk about 50 yards. And then I'm going to put them in a couple of pairs of shoes I recommend and retest their range of motion afterwards. If it is significantly improved, which it absolutely should be if it's the right pair of shoes for them, because it's allowing them to link the mechanics of their foot with their hip properly, then they should see a noticeable, significant change in their range of motion. I should feel it, and they should feel it, and also see it. And if they don't, then I'm not going to give them that pair of shoes. This is also true for people that have low arches. Just because you have a low arch doesn't mean your foot can interact with the ground very well. There's a lot of different reasons why you could have a low foot arch. It could be genetics, it could be your training and exercise history, it could be even you compensating to find a pronation strategy. So if your foot is collapsing down into the ground, as I mentioned earlier, that could be a strategy for you to find internal rotation missing somewhere in your body. A lot of the times that is at the hip. And frankly, when you see people with really, really flat feet, a lot of the times they're missing hip internal rotation too. So they can benefit potentially from a shoe that allows them to use genuine internal rotation from their hip down to their foot and back up, rather than just collapsing the whole ankle in. And there are other specific types of shoes that are helpful for this. And if someone does benefit more from a barefoot shoe or a barefoot environment, then you can just test them and test their range of motion before and after they walk and see what happens. So if I were to get someone in a good shoe, then they go walk, come back on the table, they get a good change. I take the shoes off, have them go barefoot, walk down and back again, and their range of motion is all of a sudden significantly worse, then that tells me a lot of what I need to know. That shoe is probably helpful for them right now in the short term. So in the short term, I'm gonna have them wear those shoes all day, every day. That could be for a period of 1 to 3 weeks. But just because we get them in a better pair of shoes, that doesn't mean that we stop working on the foot. So if I've got someone that's got that high arch and it can't pronate, I'm gonna get them in a shoe that promotes better pronation and arch support while I work on that pronation outside of them with those shoes on. My goal for people initially, as I've touched on, is to create an objective change on the table in their range of motion. Now, I should be able to have them leave, go home, maybe do a couple of drills at home, and then the next week have them come in without having done a drill in, let's say, 6 or more hours, and they test out with the same exact range of motion that they left that session with. And if they're not holding on to those adaptations, then we have to have a lifestyle discussion, and that's a separate video. But ideally, people start to hold on to more and more adaptations. At that point, I say, okay, start wearing your shoes 25% less. And then the next week, 25% less. And then as we progress through that, they can start to wear whatever shoes they want. And that's going to progressively get them to a point where they can, let's say they want to do the barefoot shoes or barefoot walking, they're progressively exposing themselves to that environment. I think it's irresponsible to say everyone benefits or needs this one thing. It can be a helpful goal to work towards, but in the short term, different people need different interventions.